A pandemic of violence floods the streets of major cities as cases of the media-dubbed murder virus, MV20, soar, causing those infected to go on killing sprees. Caught in the middle, police detective Angela Miller finds her only trustworthy ally in the self-proclaimed psychic PI, Gerald Henry. As the two try to navigate the violence, they are drawn into New Age guru Abramelin Harvest's plot to heal the planet. Harvest's missive?
The world is sick, and humanity is the infection.
The cure? Murder. From the twisted mind of Sean C. Baker, author of A Collection of Desires and Shadow Play in Book 1, Kim and Jesse, comes his most vicious novel yet, Murder Virus. Available where books are sold.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the Horror Vision Horror Podcast. I'm Sean.
I'm Ray.
And our guest today, once again, is Professor John Trafton from Seattle University.
Hello.
John.
Hey.
Good to see you.
Sean. Yeah, good to be back.
So you just finished, so you had a couple things I just want to talk about briefly before we get into this.
Yeah.
So you just had the Film Fest at SIF, right?
Yeah.
And then also you were doing, and I mentioned this in email and I might have been wrong. So you did a series of events based on certain movies. And the one that immediately caught my eye was you did a Stanley Kubrick, like choose your own adventure.
Yeah. It's called The Young Stanley. And it was a choose your own adventure romp through New York. And this was like, because that was, where Stanley Kubrick grew up. He was a, kid from the Bronx, and was wore it on his sleeve even when he lived for the last 40 years of his life in England, so he was a New Yorker through and through. And I thought, wouldn't it be kind of nice to really kind of get to know this like milieu that Stanley Kubrick was a part of when he was growing up in New York, and understand what his life was like before he became a filmmaker, like as a photographer, as a documentary filmmaker, and how it impacted the movies that he made. And then I thought, well, okay, instead of kind of having it be like just sort of me lecturing about it and showing clips, that could get kind of boring. Why not just like do it with like a virtual kind of interactive Google map with locations that I set up for the in-person and at-home virtual audience to kind of do a choose your own adventure and vote on the places that we go to. And each location unlocks images and videos and film clips, so you vote like, okay, do you want to go to Greenwich Village? Do you want to go to Brooklyn? Do you want to go to Newark, New Jersey, in which unlocks Day of the Fight? We got to see like crime scene photographs by Ouija, who was this famous crime scene photographer that inspired Stanley Kubrick and then he later worked with on Dr. Strangelove. You get a chance to go to you have some leave town options where you can go to LA and see his house where he lived briefly in Beverly Hills, and go up to Northern California to see parts of The Killing, or to the Toronto Planetarium where he got a lot of the ideas for 2001: A Space Odyssey. So I just thought, let's do this as an immersive experience. And it was so well that we did it again for the 50th anniversary of The Godfather a few weeks later.
That's incredible. I mean, I can't. So this was something you did live, but then was also virtual, or was it only virtual?
Oh no, it was live. We had votes coming in from our in-person audience, which, I mean, the only difficult thing of it, it's a lot easier to tally votes from a virtual audience than it is from a live audience. So I'm having to count. Count on my fingers, like people in the audience with their hands raised for let's go to the Bronx versus let's go to Midtown, and then tally up what the do the math and tally up what the virtual audience is voting on. Sometimes that got a little bit clunky here and there, but the Godfather kind of went smoother. It's like in some ways I kind of wish they were kind of reversed. So it was almost kind of like the young Stanley Kubrick was a dress rehearsal for the Godfather
Right.
Choose Your Own Adventure, but it was still a lot of fun. And I still kind of thought, this is kind of something interesting. This is something different. I was like, this turned out to be kind of a big success.
That's awesome. So is that the kind of thing where, like, if let's say you do it again, let's just hypothetically say you do it again a month from today,
Yeah.
and so people who follow you on social media, so I'll have you give your Twitter handle, and I know at least your podcast with Miles Fortune, This Movie Saved My Life, which I recommend wholeheartedly to everybody. It's fantastic. They, like, you guys have an Instagram, so it's like if they find you on social media, you will be giving them a link, and then that link is like, you would go through that link to buy a ticket, and then it's not on in perpetuity, right? So it's not like I can go back and watch this.
It is kind of like a concert,
That's
if
cool.
you missed it, which I guess is kind of, on the one hand, it's kind of unfortunate. There was one thing we were doing during the pandemic that was kind of interesting. I did a class on Guillermo del Toro, one on the films based off the Thomas Harris novels, so all the Hannibal Lecter movies, and cinema DNA dissection of Bong Joon-ho's Parasite. And they recorded those and they brought those back during the summertime for an encore.
Oh, that's cool.
Which, was moderately well received, I thought, but I wouldn't look to them doing it again, especially now that the novelty of being back in person is in full swing.
Right.
But yeah, just as you mentioned, on I think the best is on, for your listeners to find me on Instagram at John Trafton Film. And you can follow me there. And I post about events quite regularly. There's a link to my website, which posts events. And we're going to be having a new Choose Your Own Adventure later on this fall, and a couple events possibly this summer.
Okay.
I can't really talk about the fall one very much because it's not really quite on the books yet, but let's just say it may or may not be about films about Transylvania's most famous citizen.
Okay. Nice. Ernest Borgnine, right? I think he hails from there originally.
Mm-hmm.
I just never miss an opportunity in life to say the words Ernest Borgnine. It's just,
no.
I don't know why. It's just a pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, he'll always be Sergeant Fatso Jetson to me.
He's always going to be the Satanist to me in Devil's Reign. Always.
There you go. There you go. Good times.
Okay, so yeah, but I definitely encourage everybody listening to follow you, to check out John's stuff. And I just go back to the way that we met was I read your article on
Messiah of Evil.
Thank you. I was like just drawing such a blank, but that's fantastic. And then you have the article about aliens. You have the Jim Morrison article. So, I mean, your website, I feel like it's a treasure trove for cinema fanatics, cinephiles, whatever you want to call yourself. If you like movies, I feel like there's a lot there.
Oh, thank you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But so for the listeners, we're going to talk about Robert Eggers' new film, his third film, The Northman. We are going to talk about it, meaning this is full spoilers. Go, if you haven't seen the movie yet, go see it in the theater. If you're not ready to go back to the theater, I totally get it. And I wouldn't tell somebody like, oh, come on, whatever. But if you're even like, you can go to a matinee and there could be maybe nobody in there. But it is meant to be seen on the big screen. Ray and I and some friends went to see it, and we saw it at AMC, so it's widely distributed. And we saw it in the Dolby room, and the sound was just, it swallowed me. And that was like, he did that on purpose. It's very immersive. But so, full spoilers. Let's start the discussion. John, talk about The Northman.
Oh gosh, where do I begin? I think the best place to begin is just to latch on to what you said, which is immersive, because he does this with all of his films and kind of creates this very immersive environment. And he did that with The Witch and with The Lighthouse for sure. And yeah, and this is different because The Witch and The Lighthouse are very kind of claustrophobic environments, whereas like The Northman, he expands the frame. He's not
Yeah.
afraid to, go big. And I've always kind of felt like with The Witch, I mean, just starting with The Witch, there was this mansion outside of Madrid that Goya lived at when he was going all insane and everything, and he made all these kind of paintings on the wall, and it was like you walk in and it becomes a sort of immersive virtual environment, and all the paintings were like taken off and put on canvases later. But I kind of get the sense that Robert Eggers, being the huge art historian fan that he is, wanted to kind of create his own like weird Goyan maze, with The Witch. And like one of the images that Goya painted called The Witch's Sabbath, with like this Satan appearing as this black goat.
Oh, I know the painting.
Yeah, that's like that is the really, really kind of the genesis of The Witch. And then I think he kind of takes it a step further in The Lighthouse. And then he takes it to experimental territory in The Northman. It just with like all these hypnotic moments, and even just like when Olga's just dishing out mushrooms to like all of the Fjordland's bodyguards, and all the men of the village, and just like really not afraid to go experimental. And I think one of the fears I had going into this film, it's like, okay, here's Robert Eggers. He came out of the theater scene in New York, short films, then independent breakout with The Witch, Lighthouse, which was relatively low budget. What happens when you give a director like that $90 million to go make a movie?
I was afraid as well.
Yeah, I was like kind of afraid like this, like he's gonna go off the rails when, I've seen this happen with filmmakers before. It doesn't happen all the time, but I've seen it happen before. And I don't think he did. Maybe a little bit in some places, but for the most part, I don't think he did. There was an article in Variety where they're like deeply concerned about whether or not he's going to make his money back, on this film, and if whether or not he's going to be allowed to do such an experiment again, which by all indications it looks like his next movie is going to be a little bit on a smaller scale. But still, yeah, I wasn't let down, and that fear that I had didn't really come to pass. So I'm really, really quite pleased with what I saw.
Likewise. And I get, maybe I feel like maybe I overstated it when I said afraid, but I had my reservations, and it wasn't even so much about him like going bananas with the money. It was about the studio being like, you're spending our money, like, and I don't get the feeling at all that I feel like he said, I heard in an interview today I listened to, he said this is the director's cut. There were some extra scenes with Nicole Kidman that were cut because it kind of ruined the like arc of her character and the surprise, which I wasn't surprised by that. I was surprised that the way that she kind of turns on him, that like, like you were put upon me where your brother was like, conceived in love or whatever. Like, I didn't realize that there had been a resentment all along, but I knew that she wasn't going to be like, oh, thank you for rescuing me. Please take me away. Ray, what did you have reservations going in? Did you feel like any of them were that they were unfounded, or that like, no, I feel like maybe there was some, half measures, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I was honestly worried about, it's such an odd thing to be worried about, but was, you see The Witch, and it's, I think the thing that is most difficult for most people, or for a general audience, is that it's so much of an actor's piece, and like subtext, and it's not about what's being said on screen. Like he's very good at just letting scenes linger. He's very good at just letting things happen. And there's so much of even what we watch on like movies, TV, and everything that is like not only someone doing something, but someone actually saying what they're doing at the same time as they're doing it, and kind of explaining it for the audience as they're watching. And he doesn't do that. And I've always, it's one of the things I appreciate about him, is that he, like, he's just gonna film it. He's just gonna film a scene where something happens, and the actors are going to act, the actors are going to do what they're supposed to do. And you can interpret it how one way, you can interpret it another way, but the point is, he's not going to spoon feed you. He's not going to like sit there and be like, oh, this is what this means. He's going to challenge you. And one thing with a bigger budget and everything is that I've seen people who have to change their style, and more so than anything in the story, and have it then spoon feed, and then be like, oh, this is what's happening, this is what makes sense, here's an explanation. And although there's a lot more dialogue, and there's a lot more things like lot less moments of silence to carry you through this film, he doesn't do that still. And I was very appreciative of it. I was worried. That was honestly my biggest worry, was that it was going to not only be this big budget film and maybe a little bit more action oriented, but it was also going to be, well, what are you going to do after you get your revenge? And I'm going to go do this. And like a lot of plot points, a lot of overly talking and things like that. And instead, he just made a film, and he made it his style. And it still has these moments where you have to go, wow, what did that mean? Or what, how did he do, how did that make sense? Or like, or just lingering, sitting there in moments and just like having to sit there and be in the moment, and not like be somewhere else, not thinking about something else. For example, like there'd be people that you could show that scene where he crawls into that special like ceremonial room with the jester, and his father and he are both given those bowls, and like to get in touch with their animal nature, their ferocity, and act like dogs. And you'd have one person that would film that and have like, here's this bowl and it's filled with this, and we'd get to see what's in the bowl. And there's the darkness, there's the shadows. We can only imagine what possibly is in the bowl, and if it is just some kind of meat, if it is just possibly some kind of hallucinogenic, or it's literally the ceremony that is intoning them into their animal natures. And I appreciate the fact that he doesn't give us the easy answer. He doesn't go, oh, it's because there's just peyote or whatever else it is. No, it's, figure it out. Do you believe that they could have gotten in touch through this act, through this ceremony, gotten in contact with their animal selves? Quite possibly, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of that in the movie where like we see them do that, and it's I think that would be something. I mean, even those scenes alone, like the scenes where we see like there's the scene where they're the dogs. There's a scene where the uncle after they figure out that he's who he is, and she reveals who he is to the uncle, that where he and his son are both naked, and if I remember correctly, they drink blood, or do they eat some? I forget what it is. Oh, no, they get splashed with blood. That's right, they get splashed with blood. And there's the whole getting, every time there's getting ready for wars or battles, they're just like chanting and getting ready and hyping themselves up. And I feel like that would be cut out of another director's film, whereas this, he's here and is like, there it is. And I think it adds something to the characters, it adds something to the film, and it makes you work as a viewer. And I love the fact that he still is making us work, that he's not showing up and going, okay, here's this movie.
And that's so the key there. And I think the scene where young Amleth and his father, played by Ethan Hawke, Amleth played by Alexander Skarsgård, and they go into that tunnel and emerge into the ceremonial room where Willem Dafoe, who was the jester but is really actually a shaman, feeds them. But from that moment on, I felt like I had undergone what they went under, like what happened to them in a obviously I wasn't like tripping balls, but I mean, like that's where the movie started to make me feel like I had gone through what they were going through. Yeah, I mean, definitely. John, any
Yeah, normally you would get scenes like that in like a low budget movie as a way to smooth the rough edges over.
Yeah.
Whereas in this film, it's like, he's like, I'm given a bigger budget, I'm shooting with focus features this time. I am not going to shy away from that. In fact, it's just going to embolden me even more. To be even more daring. I also thought, one, the movie needed a little bit more Willem Dafoe.
Yes, but every movie does. But
yeah, every movie does, and God, other moments that just really stood out for me. I mean, well, first of all, it's like all of them are historical movies. It's like he has no desire to be in the present, which is totally fine by me. The dialogue is just immersive. It's not people in the past talking like they're New Yorkers from the present,
right?
Or kind of having like sort of like that faux Shakespeare kind of sort of dialogue that a lot of people just ascribe to the past. They just kind of they take stuff straight out of sagas, like even like dialogue and even just like small little moments. Like I absolutely loved, and this is like one thing that just really stuck out to me, the spear grab scene.
Oh yes.
Up and the spear's getting chucked right at the camera from like the height, and he just grabs it, spins it around and throws it right back.
Oh,
that's lifted straight out of a Norse saga that Eggers and his brother read and put in the script.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, like it's interesting. I think we were when we were emailing back and forth, it's like one of the things you mentioned is like kind of a complaint I guess some people had was that there were a lot of movies they kind of felt like were ripped off by this film. Like Game of Thrones was kind of a big one. I don't see that at all.
I mean, I've never watched Game of Thrones, but if there's no dragons and there's no knights, I don't see, and no frost giants, I don't see how it could be.
I started watching like season 1 of Game of Thrones like way back in the day when it came out, and I was like, no, not for me. I'm out.
Yeah, that's how I felt.
I don't see it. Conan the Barbarian, I definitely see, but I don't view that as a negative. I mean, I'm like, all movies they borrow from other movies inevitably, like in one fashion or another. I mean, that's the life. It's what literary theorists call genre memory. Genres remember past usage while at the same time they draw upon the resources of the present to say something new. In other words, I'm going to take something that existed and riff on it in a way where I create something that's never existed before. And so it's always going to be dripping with at least a little bit of it. Like Conan, there's a film from Iceland called Outlaw, the Gilshi saga from the early 80s. Andrei Rublev, which he absolutely is probably, I think, Robert Eggers' favorite movie. So it's like, just all of these things, all these things with the sagas, and Valhalla Rising by Nicholas Winding Refn kind of makes its way into it. So, it just, the whole kind of texture of the film and it kind of being layered by the memory of these past films. It's like when people, unfavorably compare it to Conan the Barbarian, I just kind of find it a little bit of an odd complaint. Although just full confession, when Amleth's father is killed, I did almost kind of expect Thulsa Doom just to show up in that scene.
With his perfect mane.
Yes.
I had not seen that since I was a kid. And so Anthony, who listeners will know from this show, he saw it the same day Ray and I did. And he was just like, I thought it was underwhelming. I thought it was just an art house attempt at redoing Conan. And I was like, man, I don't understand. So I watched Conan yesterday because I'm like, I need to be able to speak to this because I know Anthony, and like, I know to some degree he's not wrong. And so we actually talked about it on the phone earlier today. And the thing, like at first I was like, I don't, other than the fact that the revenge thing, the familial revenge, I didn't really see it, but he named a couple things. I'm like, oh, that's true. And then here's the thing. So it's genre memory for sure. And I had never heard that before, or at least I don't remember hearing it before. So I thank you, because I love that term right off the bat. But this is also based on, so like there was another person that in the Horror Vision Facebook group said, like, I mean, I just feel like it's like I've seen it, this whole thing too many times. It's just been done. But because this and Conan and other movies are based on like folklore, right? So the Icelandic and Norse sagas, which it was a prose attempt at like carrying on these stories that were the history of these people back then, right? And so it's kind of the same thing as folklore in Greek or Roman, and that's kind of the original tropes. Like, yeah, there's a reason, like, and even like so this is based on the Amleth. I don't know the actual name of the saga. They have sagas. Even if I had seen the name, I probably wouldn't be able to pronounce it. But
well, the saga of Amleth, I think, is what it's called.
Okay.
I don't know a whole lot about it beyond that.
Well, and it is what supposedly Shakespeare based Hamlet on, which makes a ton of sense. And so
both Conan and the Northman are Hamlet.
Exactly. So
I was gonna.
There's that's the reason.
Ahead,
and look, mileage may vary. I heard somebody say that recently, and I really like that, because I get it. I can't think of an example, but I know there's movies where I've been like, you know what, I've seen this 1,000 times. And I didn't want to see what was new or good or unique about this. I just was like, I'm burnt on whatever this is. And so like I definitely get it. And I definitely get it now, because you know why this movie was made is because Game of Thrones brought this whole genre back to like studios want to make anything that seems like it's even a remotely.
I was just saw that with Game of Thrones, like I think the studios were kind of looking to do sort of like a Lord of the Rings kind of rip.
Yeah,
an R-rated Lord of the Rings.
I hadn't thought of that. But then especially by this time, I mean, I get it why people are like, I'm burned out on this shit. So my hope would be some of those people might later see it under different circumstances, because the thing with this movie, the story is a story. What Eggers does craft wise, I mean, he took that budget, and instead of like going completely bananas with like stars and stuff, I mean, there's stars in it obviously, but his attention to detail in The Witch. So I rewatched that a couple months ago for something Ray and I did, and I watched an afterward where it was Robert Eggers, Anya Taylor-Joy, and two historians. I think it was done in Salem, if I'm not mistaken. And the historians were just talking about like, we couldn't believe that somebody made this movie, and like he, what kind of wood did they build with? How did they cut it? What do the blades look like? Well, then that would be wrong. So we have to cut it this. Like, his attention to historical detail is completely insane, which probably comes from, like you were saying, his being from the art world and the theater world. And I mean, he did it here, but on such a bigger level, and really used the landscape to help, right? Like, super smart. You don't even need to spend. So he built the village that they are in. They built, and they built it knowing what shots they needed, so that they always could. Like, no, we're going to build it according to the block shot list, so we know we can always get the coverage or whatever that we like. Who does that? Like, Jesus, it's amazing.
Oh yeah, no, I just the attention to detail, and sometimes you get directors that they'll make a historical film where their their dedication to historical fidelity encroaches on the emotion, the delivery of emotional content and emotional involvement in the story. You know, it just sort of feels like, you know, the film just ends up feeling like sort of cornball sermonizing. But with Eggers' work, it doesn't. It's like one hand definitely washes the other.
Yeah. Well said. Ray?
What I was going to say was that I don't know if you saw me react when we mentioned Shakespeare, because when I, one of the ways I described it to someone, I was like, oh, I'm going to go see this movie. And they were like, oh, well, what is it about? And I said, it's Hamlet with Vikings. And it just seemed to make sense. But I mean, one thing that I feel like all those people are kind of being a little bit unfair, because for one, I appreciate the fact that John keeps saying historical drama, or keeps saying historical, because that's the thing I felt about this film. I feel like it's a historical drama. I don't feel like it's a fantasy film. And those are fantasy films, meaning that there's, you know, like Middle Earth and elves and things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
There were Vikings. There were Icelanders. There were people who journeyed this way. There were people who fought with swords this way, and they had stories that went along with things. And you know, Conan. I mean, it's written. I mean, I forget the author's name, but it was
Robert E.
written by a
Howard.
guy, and thank you, in the early 1900s. And I mean, are we supposed, I mean, he was an author, so are we supposed to believe that he didn't ever pick up and read any kind of literature from the past, and go, oh, I'm gonna grab a story, I'm gonna tell it in that period? Of course he did. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just like Shakespeare did. Shakespeare based things off of previous stories. You know, it's not that uncommon a concept for some man's brother to come in and murder him to take power. And those things happened. And the fact that he's pulling from from this history, from these kind of stories to create this film, I think it is something a little bit more original and something a little bit more different than just a fantasy film, because he's not
Mm-hmm.
telling a fantasy film. He's making a film that with a story that could have taken place. And I mean, the fantastic elements of it, you know, I it was a question that there was something I was thinking about throughout as after watching it, and it was that the film, there's so much of it that is realistic, and it is clear, and the more fantastic elements, the, like, you know, running into a witch and
Mm-hmm.
she just suddenly disappears, and the talking head of the old shaman, and the disembodied talking head of the old shaman, and you know, and one person could sit there and say, well, yeah, when he put his head on her belly, maybe he heard something. I don't think so, because she wasn't showing anything.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the fact that he just suddenly knows, maybe he's just really in tune with bodies, but who's to say he didn't feel something? Who's to say he didn't get some kind of vision? And I think he presents the film in a way that it challenges our concepts of belief structures and what's possible. And I mean, it's kind of a recurring theme in his films. Like, you know, there's so much of the witch that is done so practically and done so realistically that when a goat suddenly becomes a man for a moment and then goes back, and then women float up into the air, you do question and go, maybe it happened, maybe it's it. I don't, like, I mean, we live in a society where half of, like, a good majority of the people are walking around having read this book and believe that several thousands of years ago, a couple thousand years ago, a dead man moved a huge boulder and left a cave.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not a zombie,
Yeah.
having risen and ascended into heaven. And every day and every Sunday, they get up early, they put nice clothes on, and they go and sit in a place and they pray to that person again. So there is I mean, maybe he's, one of the things that I said to Sean immediately after watching it was, this feels like he's doing a version of magical realism,
Yeah.
that he's taking a genre that is usually pretty steeped in South American qualities and bringing it over and going, I can make something that is magical but realistic as well. And there's going to be elements, and you might say, "Oh, that person's just crazy." Like, they just happened to have on cable the other night, and I sat down. I got to rewatch that film, but I started I just happened to click on to I think it was Showtime, and they were showing The Lighthouse, and
Oh, it's insane. I rewatched it last night.
it's insane, but there's that
fucking nuts.
fantastic moment where he's just carrying those buckets. He sees a woman covered in moss. He goes over to the woman. He's not sure if she's alive or dead. He starts like caressing the body, caressing the breast, and then the next thing you know, her eyes are open and she starts making that sound like a harpy. And he just is terrified and runs away. It's never addressed again. Like, he doesn't, like, I mean, except in dreams, but otherwise you question as you're watching the film, like, did he actually see someone, or is he just losing his mind?
Yeah, right.
And the easy answer is he's losing his mind. But then again,
who's to say?
Maybe he's not. Like, it's just so interesting because, I mean, because it doesn't just do this thing and like do it for no reason. I think part of the reason that I say magical realism is because it's layered into symbols, it's layered into meaning, and it's not just look at the big man, look at the talking head. Oh, isn't it neat? No, it's look at the talking head. Is he experiencing this in a way that he's actually in contact with this dead person?
Right. Or is this
or is it him looking at it and he knows what this person would have told him, and so it's his mind recreating it? Like, there's so many avenues it can go down, and it adds layers to the film. So
yeah, agreed.
Well, I really like Ray's take on, like, idea about like transporting magical realism to this world, because what I was thinking about was how this is it's not a horror film, and it's, we're talking about it on a horror film podcast.
But that's fine.
I mean, there's no rule, saying we can't talk about it, but I originally thought, when I was like looking at the trailer and before I saw the film, that he's transporting ideas from horror into what is essentially this historical epic, in just sort of like in kind of weird and interesting ways, like that whole concept of looking into the abyss, and like, you're standing on the precipice of the abyss, and the role of fate. There's an afterlife presented in the film, and I had never seen depicted on film a ride of the Valkyries before, and this is the ride of the Valkyries did not let me down,
no.
and just both with and yeah, can we talk about Bjork, just coming out of film retirement to do this
That's
film?
a pretty amazing moment.
Yeah, with like her teeth, like it looks like she's got braces, but they were like capped with like these stones that the Viking mystics used to put in their teeth, and like they put them in Anya Taylor-Joy's mouth for like the Valkyrie scenes. So it's like all of these like kind of horror elements of like life after death and like staring into the abyss and animalism, just getting transported into this world. But I think Ray's idea about transporting magic realism from the southern hemisphere into the northern hemisphere, I think is like kind of an interesting way to sort of organize one's thoughts around this. Kind of provides an interesting framework to look at it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and it kind of, I mean, if you think about the folklore and the roots that he's putting this into, it makes a lot of sense. Like I remember one of the first books that I got introduced to the concept of magical realism. It's funny because it's something that if you realize it, like we get inundated with it pretty early on. But one of the first times that I was in a classroom and it was talked about and recognized, and was like Water for Chocolate.
Yeah. And
there's this moment very early on in the book where the woman's sister, actually there's a couple things before him, but I think this one just really kicks off for me. I don't know why I think it's because it's so powerful an image. This woman is fallen in love with this man, but she her mother will not allow her to marry him. Instead, he has to marry her older sister, because that's the way it goes. And she has one other older sister above her, and she's so kind of forced to live with it because like he moves in and like becomes the man of the house. So she's kind of forced to live with him and the sister and her other sister. And she's a very good cook. And one of the ways that her emotions come through in the novel is that they come through in the food she makes. So I can't remember what it kicks off, but she sees him and before cooking, and she gets very lustful for him. And while she's making the food, her sweat drips down into the food, and it causes everybody to, for lack of a better term, kind of get turned on by the meal. No, thank you. I was trying to come up with something a little bit more classy, but I couldn't. But
they get very amorous.
There you
They
go.
get very,
There you go.
there you go. Thank you, John. They get very amorous. And her sister, who has seen in the distance this man on a horse and been very attracted to him, gets so hot, she jumps up from the table. She goes running out of the house to go find him, shedding her clothes as she goes, until finally she finds him out in like the Mexican wilderness, riding his horse naked, jumps onto the horse with him, and then goes off, marries him, and is kind of only seen a couple more times in the book. But I remember people sitting there in the classroom and being like, well, come on, who would get that hot like eating? And the professor had explained it's an exaggeration.
Yeah, I was like, I feel like
that's the way we tell stories.
This point entirely.
yeah, it kind of sounds like
it's an exaggeration, but that's how we tell stories in folklore. Like, was there a guy named Paul Bunyan who was an actually really good forester?
Yeah,
or an axeman? Sure,
all of it, right?
Was he possibly 10 feet tall or 12 feet tall or whatever? Probably not. Maybe he was 7 feet tall, maybe 6. But the point is that like we exaggerate the stories to make them grander and to make them more entertaining.
Yeah.
And so would it have been the same if her sister just sat there and ate it and was just like, I think I really need to go meet him. I think I'm gonna leave the house tonight and I'm gonna go meet him. Or for her to just suddenly jump up so hot, ripping her clothes off, run into the desert, run out into the house naked, and finding this man jumping on his horse and riding away.
Right.
Of course, it's more entertaining. So that's kind of the point of that kind of embellishment in these kind of stories.
I think
John has something.
one little thing. I mean, yeah, I know this makes for great podcasts. I know like the listeners can't see this, but this book here, the Use of Enchantment by Bruno Bettelheim, is probably Robert Eggers' Bible, and he, you know, like there's elements of this that just and it's all about fairy tales and folklore. Stanley Kubrick and Diane Johnson just poured through this book when they were writing the screenplay for The Shining. And
Interesting.
Robert Eggers, yeah, he was drawn to it when he did The Witch, and I'm certain, yeah, for anyone looking to kind of do more of a deep dive on The Northman would be, I think, do pretty well to familiarize themselves with that. That's yeah, The Uses of Enchantment by Bruno Bettelheim.
Ooh, and it is readily available. I just looked it up just on Amazon, 17.99 paperback. Very interesting. Yeah, the meaning and importance of fairy tales. And you know, like those are also like, I feel like fairy tales to a lot of people, because of the way they're taught, they're these things that are encased in this amber of like, oh, you know, folklore is this thing that you learn it about. People did it in the past. It's history, right? But we're still doing it. Like all of this. I have a friend that thinks in 100 years or 200 years or whatever, people will be wearing Millennium Falcons on chains instead of crosses. I mean,
that's interesting.
Yeah, right. Like I was like, oh my God, that blew my mind, because these are larger than life stories of heroism and trials and tribulation. And all of this stuff is just how we as entities that really have no, I mean, we've all convinced ourselves that like, oh, we get it. We've got it. You know, we've got this life thing nailed. Not at all. Like it is just that there have been moments in my adult life where I have realized like existential terror is realizing that like all the rules are really just the little white lines on the freeway. And if they could you could get somebody that's just like, I don't see them. And that's real. I mean, we've certainly seen that in this country of late. And it's scary. And so, and also that brings me into something I wanted you guys to talk about too, which is I've since watching this movie, and then I rewatched Lighthouse and we watched The Witch fairly recently. So I've just kind of been steeped in Eggers' operating system. And there's always an element of altered state, right? And the thing is, when you say altered state, people immediately think like intoxication, like a drug, or even maybe sweat lodging or whatever. But really, like, there's so many different things that affect us and alter our state. Like same friend with the Millennium Falcon comment once told me about, like, you put on a mask and it's immediately an altered state. 100% true. I would not have thought of that until he said that, but I was like, oh my God. So one of the things Eggers uses, like the Lighthouse, great example. You like, there's the isolation is creating an altered state. But then in Ephraim Winslow, but then also like he starts drinking again, and then you're starting to get in, and I mean at some point then they're mixing what, like kerosene with honey and drinking it, and you're like, yeah, I don't really know where this guy's perception of reality is even coming from. And so this is very true in The Northman. And what's more, I go back to this thing where I feel like Eggers found a way to very drastically alter our like, and it had a lot to do. And he said in an interview I read that it was purposeful. The score and the sound design was done in an aggressive fashion that was the result he was looking for. So I put it to you guys then, like, how did you feel when you were in the movie and when you were done with the movie? Did you feel like, I mean, I feel like it cheapens it to say like it's like some kind of a drug experience, but like removing that, like I did feel like I've been in altered states in my life because of meditation or LSD or driving long distances. Totally does it. It produces a hypnagogic state. I mean, there's all kinds of things, but did you talk to me about how you felt like physically, mentally?
Yeah, I felt like I was hypnotized throughout, and I felt very much like I thought that this would be it would make for an interesting trip movie, uh, but for the fact that its formal elements are so aggressive.
Yeah,
They're like the music and the visuals. Like it's not going to be a mellow high. Like you're
yeah,
not
definitely
going to
not.
this isn't going to be this isn't Pink Floyd's The Wall. This is going to be or even 2001: A Space Odyssey. This is it is almost kind of like a drug movie and very like sort of like an enhanced experience. But yeah, the visuals and the sound, they just assault the senses so much. It's like I kind of think to myself, man, you'd have to be just sort of a pretty seasoned stoner to be able to
Yeah,
cope with some of this stuff.
I totally agree. And I'm so full disclosure, I'm going back tomorrow, and
Mhm.
I already bought a ticket. And Ray, obviously, I extended the invitation if you're available.
Mhm.
I'm gonna. I don't. I just. I don't. I
You're gonna eat an edible?
no, because edibles scare the fuck out of me. I can't quantify that. And as I mean, I've noticed over the last couple years, I've gotten. It used to be when I went to a movie, like I was always gonna smoke some pot before I went in, because then it's just such an optimum state. But some things have happened with, and like for one, I realized there's just like a low level background radiation of fear that because of the last couple of years, it's just there. So that's going to affect me. And so I'm like, man, I don't even know, like, do I even feel safe? And I feel stupid saying it, but whatever. Like, do I even, like, I don't want to be like worried about something while I'm there and then have the theatrical experience ruined that way. But I feel like I need to do it. So I'm going to do it tomorrow, and I want to see how that, just what it's like. I wanted to do it the other day, but I was like, I'm just going to see it totally sober, and it was great. I mean, you don't need it by not by any stretch of the imagination, but I am really curious how it's going to be in that Dolby theater with just pitch dark lighting and just giant screen and really loud. And I want to be transported.
You know, I generally don't do the altered state thing really kind of anymore. I mean, it's just kind of, but even like way back in the day when I would always have to make sure that I see it once before diving into it.
Right.
And there's kind of almost like this sort of fluidity to the visuals and the audio that kind of like creates sort of a conducive environment. And I see it with the Northman. I mean, if you do it, I mean, definitely like let me know like how it
Yeah.
is, because
Yeah, I
it's like,
will.
I'm always kind of really kind of curious, about this. I mean, there's part of me that thinks the experience might be obnoxious, but maybe not. Who
Maybe not.
knows?
Yeah. Ray, how did you feel physically, mentally, emotionally while you were watching this movie, or after you were watching this movie?
Wow, that's something I didn't think about. Hey, wow. I don't know. I guess I mean I was definitely entertained. I mean, the music when everything was really part of it. I think I'd never been exposed to that kind of music before, and I honestly was there was something I was like really kind of a combination of impressed, surprised, with the like I guess you call it throat singing, because it does sound very similar to throat singing that like not because it's not quite humming or intoning. It's that
Yeah.
that they're doing, and I never thought about the fact that like, because I'd heard about it with like some Asian cultures and so and like Aboriginal cultures, but I never heard of it with Northern cultures. And I
Mhm.
was it's so interesting to me that that there's so much that is common in cultures that accidentally is common, that we don't necessarily recognize. But you know, when you think about other cultures and what getting ready for battle looks like, or what getting ready for um ceremony and dancing and things like that, and what they look like and what purpose they serve, how similar, like there's how similar so many cultures are, and what the act looks like and what the act is, and the purpose of it. I don't know.
Is it fair to
It
say
definitely
that
felt
the
like a go for it.
no, go ahead, finish your thought.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, is it fair to say that you're experiencing that kind of vocalization set to those images made you feel something that you had never felt before? Or that you were not, let's put it this way, that is not like easily like called upon in your memory bank. So we store our experiences and then reference them later and they inform everything.
Okay, yeah, yeah. That is, I mean, it definitely was a new experience. Like, kind of the whole film felt like a whole new experience.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
I mean, I get the concept of, I get the way that it could be tied to things and how it could be similar to other things that I've seen, but I'd be hard pressed to really pin down another film that like feels so exactly like this.
I think, Ray, what you're talking about is kind of interesting. This it's one thing that like Scorsese hasn't been able to do in quite a long time, in my opinion, which is like this euphoria of the newness. And I think Robert Eggers, in like a lot of his films, he's been able to do that. And really kind of the same people that were coming up with the ideas about genre memory also kind of identified that what it's like, what makes a work of art good. And many argue that when a work of art defamiliarizes, it makes either the familiar strange or that makes the familiar difficult. Just like, it's like poetry is more difficult than prose, and it therefore kind of reveals more, and so that's kind of what what I think Robert Eggers is doing. I think that's what you're seeing. And with the throat singing, I do have to agree with that. Just on a side note, Ray, I do have to recommend this. Have you ever heard of a Mongolian metal band called The Who? And that's Who spelled H-U. It's a Mongolian metal band that their music is entirely traditional Mongolian instruments, but done orchestrated in a way that sounds like heavy metal, and it's all the Mongolian throat singing.
I gotta hear that.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
YouTube the song "Wolf Totem" by the Who after this podcast, and you'll just
I will
completely trip you out. But yeah, when I was hearing the throat singing in The Northman, I just thought, wow, this kind of sounds like that Mongolian band The Who almost. To just sort of like the way that not just like the fact that it sounds similar, but just the way the sound is orchestrated for dramatic effect. It defamiliarizes for sure.
And really, like, that is, so I think now here we're on to something I think maybe I was looking for and didn't even realize it, but was like that, man, that defamiliarization, that is everything that I feel like we've been talking about. And like, like to go back to The Lighthouse again, I had forgot that movie feels like a David Lynch movie. Like, it's so industrial space, and like even just the recurring sound of the horn and whatnot. And I hadn't seen it since the theater, so I'd kind of forgotten. But it almost defamiliarizes you from the people in the movie as being people. And on top of it, as I'm saying that, there is a point where Pattinson says to Defoe, "You've been living by yourself out here so long. He says something like, you're not even a person anymore. You removed like all of your ability to be a person." I forget how he words it, and the witch also. So you start with this family where they, they're cast out and they go out into the middle of the wilderness and decide that they're going to isolate themselves, but they don't, that's fine. And again, it's like this isolation as an altered state, and it defamiliarizes things, the setting or the events in the movie to those people, but then also it does that to the viewer. And like the witch, I know a lot of people that think it's kind of a slow burn. I don't think it's a slow burn. I'm not saying that they're wrong, but there's something, I'm so aware of the tension in that movie, and how I just feel like for the whole movie, if the tension is a knob, Eggers is just perfectly fluidly turning it up ever so slightly until you hit the crescendo. And so it just, to me, it moves very quickly because of that, because it's like there's always something around the corner now. There's never this, even when there's not anything literally around the corner of the movie. And then the thing with the Northman I thought was so brilliant. He's like, well, I'm not going to get my revenge yet. I'm going to turn his life into a nightmare. And it's like, first of all, what a awesome concept. I mean, that is, and I just love the way they did it. I mean, just the way, it's like first that he kills the brother's two friends and does that like Seven-esque, whatever that is on the barn, where it's like the limbs are like stitched together or whatever. And then the dosing of the guard patrol, where then they just lose their minds and like some of them stab themselves or stab others. Just, oh my God. So did you guys feel like, and I don't want this to be perceived as a criticism, it is not. I wondered if some of the kills were intentionally done in a way where you didn't actually see the full bloody gore of it. And which kind of surprised me, because I kind of expected it to be a bloodier movie. It's bloody in theory, but I don't know that I saw like as much as I thought I was gonna see. And even that thing with the limbs, they really don't show it for very long.
Yeah, I love that they didn't that they kept it gory, but he's not trying to do Braveheart, or he's not trying to do Gladiator here. He's doing his own thing, and this is very, very calculated. And I love that about it. I also love that, like, there's this kind of moment where when he discovers, that his mother really isn't the person, that he had idealized, and he kind of has this opportunity to just like pack up his shit and run, just take Olga with them. And, like he has an out, and a pretty damn good one.
Yeah.
And just completely decides, no, I'm gonna see this through to this conclusion, because I've just invested far too much emotionally in this.
Yeah. Oh man. Wow. It reminds me, I'm going to give you, like, there's a dead center and there's two movies on either side, and I think both work, but they're different. The hold on that atrocity of the severed limbs, and then picture Ari Aster's Midsommar and the cliff jumper, right? And the hold on. So neither one of them overstay their welcome. And I think they're both perfect the way they are. But it's interesting because both of those directors, and they're kind of on, a parallel course, in my opinion. I mean, they're just these new guys that come out of the, they just come out of the gates running with these like, oh my God, this is your first movie. Oh my God, this is your second movie. But the Midsummer, they hold on it and you expect them to pull it away, and they don't. They leave it ever so slightly longer so that you really fully, your mind's eye just gets gorged on that image. Where here it's not like that. It's, you get it, but it's like, wait, what? Oh, by the time you're trying to process what you were looking at, it's gone. And so I don't know, I feel like it's interesting the way different people use violence and gore. And I agree. I think I didn't need anything else from the Northman as far as blood wise, but I just wondered if, I don't know, I wasn't sure if, I'm like, is there like another cut where it would be bloodier? But it, like you said, he's not doing that. He's doing what he's doing.
Yeah, if there's another cut that exists where it's bloodier, I don't think we need it. I mean,
There's
I mean,
not.
sure. I mean, if it exists, sure, why not? I'll watch it. But it's not like we need it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And he said in an interview I read today that like this is the director's cut minus a couple scenes for Nicole Kidman's character. So there's not. So that was his vision, and it works. It's, again, not a complaint. I don't want anyone even at home thinking like, I'm not really a gore hound. It's when it's done well, it can be a great addition to a movie. I mean, I'm always kind of like concerned with how it's done.
Yeah, like CG blood.
Yeah, that's just bad.
Yeah,
it's never
like,
gonna be a good thing.
Yeah, like there's God, there's some horror films where over the last 5 years, like some of which I absolutely loved, but the CGI blood just like took me out of it.
Name one, just anything off the top of your head.
Suspiria. I thought Suspiria was like the best film of 2018, but there's one moment where I could tell I was looking at CGI blood, and I was like, nah, come on,
It was the ending, huh?
Yeah. It was during that like final like witches orgy scene, that like
I get that.
Yeah, you got the Tom York music going in the background. It was like, it's so good, except I was like, if you had just upped your game on the practical effects, it would have been perfect. So I mean, so I'm glad like this Northman wasn't like up to its heels in like CGI blood and bombarding us with like stuff that's just like complete lunacy. Even though there's definitely some batshit crazy stuff in this film.
I question, I think, I don't. Let me propose this, in that I think that possibly maybe one of the reasons he pulls back on moments, like the display with the bodies. I'm reminded of that moment where they're playing that strange game, and the son comes running out into the game, and he stops the man and he starts headbutting him. We don't see the result of the headbutting. We hear the result of the headbutting. And
like that lacrosse game.
Yeah, which seems counterintuitive to what he wants, because it's the mother's new son. So why wouldn't he just let him die? But it seems like he's smart enough to also know that it ingratiates him to them, and it gets him a better position. But possibly, maybe it's that if we got more blood in certain moments, or we kept longer on the bodies, we'd start to question, as an audience, perhaps his sanity, maybe, and in his quest for vengeance, and think that maybe he's tipped over into another place of insanity, and like is it even about his father? Is it even about what happened and getting this vengeance, or is it about violence? Is it about blood and getting those things? And that I'm curious, like one thing about that scene with the bodies and the way they were put up, it seemed like I I'm so curious to know if he maybe was trying to spell out a word
Oh,
or make them look like something, like an animal, because at first I thought placed him in some kind of strange like horse-looking creature, and then the other thing I thought was maybe he literally put a word up there to that only they would know because it's in that in Icelandic, which I think majority. He knew that the majority of his audience wasn't going to necessarily know. But I mean, I'm just thinking, also thinking about like, there's that scene with where he, like I said, he headbutts that man, and we don't see the results of the headbutting. We just know the guy doesn't get back up, but we hear it, and I think it. I I think part of, like I said, it's part of it. I think is that he's trying to tell us that it's not about the blood, it's about the revenge, it's the goal, and that's not, that shouldn't be your focus. Your focus shouldn't be on these bodies and how they're arranged necessarily. Your focus shouldn't be on like, well, look at that guy's face and look at what he just did to it. um it's about where it gets him, if that makes sense.
yeah. Yeah, I like that a lot. I feel like that makes a lot of sense as a filmmaker. And it also shows, I mean, he obviously loves the genre, and he's obviously,
Yeah.
I think, like John said, he's transporting elements of it into these other, kinds of movies, like this being this, historical epic. And I do feel like, okay, so I guess Evil Dead 2 is a bad example, but like the amount of blood in that movie is ridiculous where it's like they're not trying to be serious. They're it's supposed to be so over the top that it's ridiculous. But there are movies I feel like that, oh god, there's an example. There's a movie.
I just think Return of the Living Dead.
Oh
Just
well,
like
I mean
in terms of over the topness.
that man,
Like,
that's
nothing is serious.
that's a great example of that. Even though I will say that movie, in rewatching that last year, I really like that movie, and it's not just because it's become this like iconic. There's so many things that are iconic about it that it just feels good to rewatch, right? But it's still, there's elements of that movie that disturb me in a way. It's just on the line of what I'm not comfortable with. So I'm comfortable with it probably because everything else is so over the top. But there are some things in that movie that are like the and I think Ray, I and Anthony talked about this on this show. I think where that, like, when they're interrogating the body, and it's like the pain of being dead, like that is like really fucking harrowing. And
Yeah.
there are not, before we started rolling, for the listeners, when Ray, John and I got on first and Ray joined us, but we were talking about movies that scare us, and there's not a lot of movies that legitimately scare me. That actually might be a good example of one that does that, like, really, because that, like, Jesus, talk about like just drilling right into the human condition. Let's all hope it's not unbelievably painful to be dead, right? Like, geez, like,
Yeah.
I mean, realistically, I feel like that's where all religion comes from, is like somebody saying like, well, I can't
At
control you
least it'll
by,
be better someday.
yeah, exactly. At least I can promise you something will be better, right? So, oh man, but anyway, I'm sorry. I'm like completely like Jack Kerouacking the giant roll of paper here as I speak. But the thing with the Northman is he shows this reserve as a filmmaker to not show us these things, because you're right, he wants us focused on more of like the revenge and like the kind of ramifications of it and the living ramifications of it in the moment. And like, the ultimate one being like, he's told the prophecy, you're going to get the chance to either like stay with your loved ones or finish your revenge. I'm completely dumbing down the way that it was presented, but and he almost goes one way and goes back for the revenge. But so that's the most important thing. So I feel like to really get a lot of blood play might have kind of eased off of that tension of his whole agenda. And it was really, the whole movie was just about creating that. Again, he creates attention so well. Man, wow.
Yeah, it's like for gory revenge, it's like Kill Bill, I think, was a gorier revenge story. Man on Fire with Denzel Washington was a gorier revenge story than The Northman. It wasn't like I went in expecting to be put through the ringer by Robert Eggers. I mean, when I've taught horror cinema classes before, the witch is the one that always scares my students the most.
That's awesome.
I've had an assignment. I had this one assignment where students do like a short weekly written response in the form of a journal, but they give a rating on a scale of 1 to 10, to the film, like 1 being, mildly intense to 10 being my life is fucking ruined. And like I think The Witch just got like 9.
Really?
9, here and there. Like Argento Suspiria got like 5, 6. Shining got more or less in that kind of range. Tetsuo the Iron Man scored pretty high, and everything else just kind of scored below 5. And then boom, The Witch just like shoots everyone's rating right up. They're like, they're like, I did not like this experience at all.
When you mentioned, John, you talked about your students saying that how scary they thought The Witch was. I think it's because he's not prone to embellishment. I think it's because he's not he's I think he feels like a director that's not working with a safety net.
Yeah.
Especially one for the audience. Like, oh, you can just go out and say this isn't real, like afterward. And I think it's just told in such a way that it doesn't feel safe. And for horror audiences, I think horror audiences are different than regular audiences, because horror audiences have the ability to, after a while, watch something and remove themselves from it and not be a character, or not feel like, if I were in this film, what would I do? And just watch them. Whereas I think the majority of people still will watch a film and feel like, which character do I identify with? How would I feel if I were inside this film? And if you were going to identify with anybody in the film, more than likely you're going to identify with Anya Taylor-Joy's character, whose name I just completely blanked on just now. I had it a moment ago. But and the way that, like, the insidious of maybe madness and evil, that it can take these people that are your family and eventually remove you and separate you from them until you're finally alone, and you are vulnerable. You're vulnerable to its sway. You're vulnerable to being taken over. You're vulnerable to accepting something you wouldn't have. Like, from the get-go, she's the one who's we see her every time, and she's praying and she's asking the Lord for forgiveness for her sins, which when we're watching the film, we kind of have trouble finding. Like,
Yeah.
She seems like a very good daughter. She seems like she's very taking care of her family and very there for them, and trying to make sure that, like, her siblings aren't acting like brats and everyone's doing their work and that things are getting accomplished. But yet we see her get blamed for things that go wrong that have nothing to do with her.
Mm-hmm.
And when the proposition finally comes along, and it's like, how about you give up all this nonsense? You can give up this life. You can give up having this life of not only being this person in this family, but this person in the society that at that time, with the way that the Christianity was formed, um feeling indebted and feeling like you're already a sinner, and what you're working towards is because the concept of original sin and like everything is so part of what her Christianity is. So she's
Mhm.
already a sinner day one. She's moment she was born. It's one of the things that bothers them when when the little brother disappears the baby, because if a baby died and it's not, and it has been
Wasn't
christened,
baptized. Yeah.
yeah, wasn't
Mhm.
baptized, and it's gone, the soul's gone to hell. So you're so in, inundated with that concept that if it becomes so inescapable and that you can't ever be good, and someone comes along and says, how about you just give up trying to be good and you just be bad,
Yeah.
um
Own it.
how about that, and you give yourself over to it. It's a menacing concept. It's a
Yeah.
menacing, I think we all kind of have to deal with it on a daily basis, whether we decide to keep getting up and going to work, or hey, maybe this is the day I start to become a bank robber, like
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
we all have to deal with keeping towing the line, or giving that up and just living the way we want to live. And even when you look at his other films, like you look at Lighthouse, is it, continue to toil away, work hard, or give yourself over to madness, because maybe madness isn't quite as bad as getting up every day and slugging through this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like the fact that, I mean, yeah, there's supernatural elements in the Witch, less so in the Lighthouse, and then we get more so in the Northman. But it's really because I think like Eggers just kind of knows and really, really kind of understands this whole like kind of mapping out the human thought process. And it just sort of becomes like a maze that you follow. Sean and I, we were talking just like, again, right before the show about, movies that scare us. And I recommended George Saussure's The Vanishing, the original one from 1988, not the Hollywood remake from 93, but the original one. And that film, like no supernatural elements to it whatsoever, all taking place within the human world. Yet it's a horror film through and through, and a scary one at that, because the way it knows the human thought process, and it just totally manipulates, our own thought process against us. And I think that's showing up, in a very labyrinthian way in like all of Robert Eggers' work.
Well said. Um, Closing thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna say not probably in the grand scheme of things so far, not my favorite of out of the three Robert Egger films we have so far. I mean, I'd probably give that slot to The Witch, although
Mhm.
The Lighthouse is pretty close on its heels. But
Mhm.
The Northman, not bad for his big, I guess, I mean, Focus Films is still kind of an indie label, so to speak, but yeah, big budget debut, not bad. Would really love to see that long awaited Nosferatu remake with Anya Taylor-Joy finally get off the ground with a pretty sizable budget.
Yeah. Agreed. Oh man. Ray.
I kind of feel, I feel the same. I mean, it's a great, it's definitely a good watch. I'd say go out and see the theater. Um, Ironically, one thing is that I think a big screen helps the film, but one thing that like I was gonna say was, um, and it was Kirsten, Sean's girlfriend, who brought it up afterward. I don't know what your viewing was like, Sean, but like I said, like you said, we saw it at the AMC in Adobe. And it's on a big screen. But I don't know what is going on with AMC lately, or it's something with projector or the way they get it sent to them. But for some reason, even though it's this widescreen, it was still small on the wide screen. Like they didn't open it up as wide as the screen was. Um,
That's not okay.
which detracted from it. I was like, what? Why are you doing it this way? Like, I don't get it. Like, you're kind of reminding me of the artifice of it, and I don't want that. Like, I'd say if you can go somewhere and have something like, God, the Egyptians closed, right? Maybe the Arrow, maybe something like that, where you can get a nice screen where it's going to fill it all, where you got the sound going. Like, it's an experience, and it's definitely worth seeing.
Yeah, I definitely stand by that. I mean, more and more I keep telling people, and I realize that, not everybody wants to hear it because not everybody's comfortable. And, so if you're listening, just know that, like, I'm taking that into consideration. But I do feel like I've regained my comfort with going to the cinema. And like I said, you can often go to matinees or whatever. There's not really that many people there. But I said the same thing about X. I said the same thing about You Won't Be Alone. But I guess it's just because that is the optimum way, and I missed it, so it feels even more so now that it's back. But man, I mean, this just in the cinema was it again. It the ultimate goal is to be taken somewhere, to have the movie control you, and I just it did. And I just think if you can see it on a big screen, you should, because it is, man, it's something. I really felt like it was an altered state, and just also gorgeous. Like there's a scene, many landscape scenes, but the one where they're in that hot spring and he's healing.
Yeah.
I mean, and you're just looking at this landscape that, God, it was just unbelievable. So beautiful.
Yeah.
Guy's got an eye. So, all right, gentlemen, thank you both.
Yeah, you bet. Always a
and
pleasure.
John, you can come back anytime. And
Thank you.
Absolutely.
so, okay, so for the Horror Vision Horror Podcast, I'm Sean.
I'm Ray.
And I'm John.
And thank you for listening, and go see The Northman.